Hello everyone, welcome back. Today, we're talking about Leona Kingscholar, and I think he might be one of the most misunderstood characters in Twisted Wonderland. And that's partly the game's fault for not giving us the full picture. On the surface, his story seems pretty straightforward. Lazy prince, bitter about being second in line, cheats to win, get caught, had a breakdown. Classic villain stuff, right? But when you actually dig into Leona's character, especially with the additional context from the light novel, you realize his overplot was never about wanting to be king. It was about something much more fundamental and painful. The exhausting cycle of hoping and failing, of being told that you're not enough, no matter what you do. So, let's break down who Leona really is, what he actually wants, and why his story is one of the most relatable in the entire game. To understand Leona, we have to start from the very beginning. From the moment he was born, Leona was trapped in a narrative that he never wrote. He was the spare, the second son, the backup plan. And here's the thing about being the second born prince. You're important enough that everything you do is scrutinized, but not important enough for any of it to actually matter. You're constantly compared to your older sibling, constantly evaluated, constantly reminded of your place. For Leona, that older sibling was Valena, and by all accounts, Valena is genuinely a good person, kind, beloved by the people, responsible, supportive, which somehow makes it worse for Leona because he can't even properly hate his brother. Valena didn't do anything wrong. He even tries to encourage Leona and offer emotional support. But Valena was born first. That's it. That's the only difference between them that mattered to everyone else. So, Leona grew up watching his brother receive unconditional love and praise for everything he did, while Leona's own achievements were met with suspicion, fear, or indifference. And this shaped how he saw the world and himself. The turning point came when Leona discovered his unique magic, King's Roar. The ability to turn anything to sand, to reduce matter to dust with a touch. It's an incredibly powerful ability, objectively impressive. But instead of praise, what did Leona get? Fear. People were terrified of him. The servants whispered behind his back. This destructive power in the hands of the second prince, the one who had every reason to resent his position, made the court deeply uncomfortable. They saw him as a threat, as a monster like, rather than as an asset to the kingdom. And here's where Leona's perspective gets really tragic. He believed that the only reason people feared him instead of praising him was because he was born second. If Elena had developed the exact same magic, they would have celebrated as a sign of a strength and leadership, proof that the future king would be powerful. But because it was Leona, the spare, the second born, the one they already looked down on, it was treated as something dangerous and frightening. He wasn't wrong to think that, honestly. The double standards was real, and Leona, even as child, was perceptive enough to see it clearly. That when he started to resent Valena. Not because Valena did anything to him personally, his brother was supportive after all, but because Valena represented everything Leona couldn't have. Unconditional love, automatic respect, a future that mattered. Valena was loved, while Leona was hated. and the only difference between them was birth order. So, what does a kid do when they realize that nothing they accomplish will ever be enough? When they understand that no matter how hard they try, they'll always be compared unfavorably to their sibling. When the system is rigged against them from birth, they stop trying. Known as infamous laziness isn't actually just laziness. It's a defense mechanism. It's what psychologists call learned helplessness. If nothing he does will change how people see him, then why bother doing anything at all? This is the core of Leona's character. I can't change anything, so there's no point in trying. He convinced himself that his fate was sealed, that he was powerless to change his circumstances. And if he can't change it, then the only option left is to accept it, right? To just go through the motions, to do the bare minimum, to not care. Lilia even calls this out in book 2, pointing out that Leona lives slothfully, wastes his life away and blames others for his problems rather than making an active effort to change and make something of himself. That's not the attitude of a king or any kind of leader. But here's the thing, if you don't try, you can't fail. If you don't hope, you can't be disappointed. Leona built his entire personality around protecting himself from the pain of rejection by preemptively rejecting everything himself. I could have done it if I wanted to. I just didn't feel like it. That's his safety net. As long as he can say he wasn't really trying, he never had to confront the possibility that even his best wouldn't have been good enough anyway. This might also explain why Leona had been held back a year. He's the only 20 years old in the third year in the main cast. It's not that he is not smart enough. Leona is brilliant. It's that he stopped caring enough to put in the effort consistently to pass. Now here's where we need to challenge the common interpretation of Leona's character. We're told over and over that Leona is bitter about not being king, that he wanted the throne, that his overblot was about his jealousy over the crown. But look at his actual behavior. Leona despises bureaucracy and politics. He actively avoids his princely duties. Kivaji mentions that Leona makes excuses to avoid going home. In one event, Leona even convinced Phil, Jack, and Lilia to become sunset warriors, just so he could dodge giving guardian lessons. Does that sound like someone who actually wants to be king? Someone who wants to deal with the responsibilities of ruling? Here's what I think is really going on. Leona doesn't really want the crown. He wants what the crown represents. To Leona, being king means being automatically loved, respected, and valued. It means your opinions matter, your accomplishments are celebrated, you belong somewhere, and no one can take that away from you. Leona's entire life, he watched Felina receive those things unconditionally, just by being the firstborn. And somewhere along the way, Leona convinced himself that the only way he could ever receive the same love and respect was by becoming king himself. If I were king, they would love me too. It's not about the power or politics or ruling a kingdom. It's about finally being seen as enough, about being valued for who he is rather than pitied, feared, or dismissed as despair. And then, Checa was born. Valena's son, the next heir, the person who will inherit the throne after Valena, completely skipping over Leona in the line of succession. With Checa's birth, any theoretical path to the throne was permanently closed. Leona would never be king. The door wasn't just closed, it was welded shut, locked, and buried. Leona even mentions in his birthday boy vignettes that he decided to enroll at Night Raven College after Cheka was born. That timing isn't coincidental. As Leona says in his post-overblot flashback, Cheka's birth means that the spy's second son loses what little claim he had to the throne forever. That was the final nail in the coffin of his hopes. And every time Leona sees Cheka, he's reminded of that. This innocent, cheerful child who adores his uncle and just wants to play with him. Cheka has no idea that his very existence represents the death of whatever hope Leona had been clinging to. It's not Cheka's fault, obviously. Cheka didn't ask to be born into this role. But that doesn't make it hurt less for Leona to be around him. That's why Leona doesn't answer Cheka's letter, why he lies and hangs out quickly when Cheka calls on Halloween, why he bristles whenever his nephew shows up. It's too painful of a reminder. So, why did Leona enroll at NRC a year late, despite initially having no interest in attending? According to the light novel, Leona literally describes it as running away from the pain. He was tired of thinking about his circumstances, about the throne he'd never have, about being constantly reminded of his place. The light novel gives us this really poignant passage where Leon explains that if something is far enough, you cannot long for it. The intensity of the sun, the scent of new leaves, the damp wind, all those reminders of home become nothing but a blur from a distance. The restlessness dulls, the pain slowly numbs. This explains so much about Leona's behavior. Why he doesn't go home if he can help it. Why he makes excuses to avoid returning to the sunset savannah. Why he seems to have deliberately put physical and emotional distance between himself and his homeland. It wasn't laziness or lack of caring. It was self-preservation. Out of sight, out of mind. If he's not constantly surrounded by reminders of everything he can't have, maybe he can finally find some peace. And for a while, it worked. Yana mentions that his heart started feeling lighter, his anguish dulled. He could breathe again, away from the suffocating expectations and constant comparisons. For the first time in his life, he was somewhere his status as second prince didn't define him. At NRC, specifically in Savannah Claw, something changed. Leona was admired for his own merit, his strength, his cunning, his intelligence, his leadership. These were what mattered. His dorm members called him king, not because of his bloodline, but because he earned that title through his actions. For someone who spent his entire childhood being told his efforts didn't matter, this was everything. Finally, he had found a place where he belonged, where he was respected not out of obligation, but because people genuinely looked up to him. He had a pack, a found family of sorts, people who depended on him, who believed in him, who wanted him to lead them. Leona didn't just find a place to hide from the pain at NRC. He found a new dream to replace the one he'd lost, becoming the king of Savannah Claw in a place where his accomplishments actually meant something. But then, something happened that Leona didn't expect. That spark of hope he thought he extinguished, it started to reignite. His dorm members spoke eagerly about the future. With sparkling eyes, they looked at him for guidance, for leadership, for a better tomorrow. Help us, they say. You're the only one who can do it. Please. Just as expected of our house warden, our king. And despite all his efforts to protect himself, despite all his attempts to not care, Leona started to care again. He started to hope again. And that terrified him. And then Malio's draconia entered the picture. Malleus represents everything Leona has spent his life running from. Is a literal personification of that concept of fate that Leona hates so much. An obstacle Leona cannot overcome through normal means. Malleus is one of the five greatest mages in the world. He's a dragon fey prince with centuries of magical lineage and natural born power that Leona can never match. Is so powerful that people fear and respect him in equal measure. And here's the thing that makes it even worse. Malleus is a crown prince. He's everything Leona wanted to be but couldn't. He has the power, the position, the recognition. He is living proof that Leona's situation could have been different if only he had been born differently. Leona had developed what you would call an inferiority complex, projecting his frustrations onto Malleus specifically. He provokes Malleus with cruel taunts, schemes to get rid of him, because Malleus represents the life Leona should have had, or at least that's how he feels. And to make the matter worse, every single year the Spelldry tournament brackets pit Savannah Claw against Diasomnia in the first round. Every single year. From Leona's perspective, it's like fate is personally mocking him. You thought you could build something here? You thought you could be a king in your own right. Well, here's Malleus to remind you that you'll never be able to measure up. Here's something crucial that often gets overlooked. The Spell Drive tournament isn't just about school pride, it's a scouting opportunity. Professional teams watches these matches to recruit players. For many Savannah Cloud students, getting scouted at this tournament could be life-changing. It could set up their entire future career. But with Malleus on the field, their chances of getting noticed are basically zero. He dominates the game so completely that no one will ever look at any other players. All their hard work, all their training, meaningless because they have the bad luck of being matched against someone they can't possibly compete with. So the Savannah Cloud students turned to Leona. They needed him to come up with a plan. They were depending on him because he's the only one smart and strong enough to potentially find a way to beat Malleus. Their futures were literally in his hands. As king, Leona couldn't let his pack starve. He knew that. But he also knew that Malleus couldn't be defeated head on. And what's Leona supposed to do? He knows he can't beat Malleus in a fair fight. Winning against one of the five greatest mages in the world through conventional means is impossible. And Leona's not delusional enough to think otherwise. The pressure is crushing. If I fail them now, they'll see I'm not worthy. This little kingdom I built, this acceptance I found, this place where I finally belong, it will all disappear. If Leona failed, he loses everything. The love and respect he desperately craves. The one place where he finally felt valued. Gone. So he made a desperate choice. He cheats. He had Ruggie use his unique magic to injure Diasomnia players before the match, sabotaging them so Savannah Claw might actually have a chance. The cheating isn't about winning a game. It's about desperately clinging to the one place where he finally felt like he mattered. Of course, the plans get exposed. You and the others uncover what's been happening. And everything falls apart. And Leona's reaction is telling. He doesn't rage at being caught. He doesn't scramble for excuses or try to shift blame. He just accepts it. The light novel describes this moment perfectly. When I realized that the plan to remove Malleus has failed, suddenly I understood that everything is pointless, that the future throne I desire does not exist. It's the I told you so he's been telling himself his whole life. See? I tried and I still failed. Nothing I do matters. I was right all along to not hope. He's so accustomed to failure that it's almost familiar. At least when things fall apart in predictable ways. There's a twisted kind of comfort in that. He was right to expect the worst. But Leona also says something interesting. It didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. Maybe because he's so used to losing. Maybe because some part of him expected this outcome all along. Maybe because failure is safer than hoping and being disappointed. It's a fool's errand to strive for something that cannot be obtained, he thinks. I want to forget it all as soon as possible and be at ease. So, Yana does what he always does when faced with pain. He tries to run from it emotionally. He tries to convince himself that none of it mattered anyway. The tournament didn't matter. Savannah Claw didn't matter. The respect of his dormmates didn't matter. His reign didn't matter. If he can just make himself not care, then losing it all won't hurt so much. This is Leona's last-ditch attempt to protect himself from disappointment. He'll give it up. He'll act like it was all meaningless all along. He'll retreat to the shadows to lick his wounds, to be far away from that pain. But, of course, it doesn't work. Because deep down, it mattered more to him than anything. So, what actually triggers Leona Overblot? It's not the failure itself. It's not even the public humiliation or the consequences. It's his dorm members refusing to give up on him. The line novel is very explicit about this. Ruggie, Jack, and the others, they all talk about the future with sparkling eyes still. They still believe in Leona. They're not ready to give up. Weren't we going to turn the world upside down together? Ruggie challenged him. You could take on Diasomnia if you actually tried. I still remember that play you did 3 years ago. And Leona is terrified, not of their expectations, but of what those expectations can do to him. The light novel states, it's not their expectations that scare me. I'm scared of myself, of how pathetic I would be if their words inspired me, so that I am never able to give up hope. This is the core of Leona's breakdown. He's terrified of hope because hope means vulnerability. Hope means trying again. Hope means the possibility of being hurt when reality doesn't live up to it. Somewhere in his heart, there's still lingering hope that maybe, just maybe, he can still do it. That maybe he can lead Savannah Cloud to victory. That maybe he is worthy of being their king. It's an unbelievably optimistic, sweet thought, filled with wishful thinking, Leona thinks. His dorm members keep talking about these foolish dreams that will never come true. But in the end, Leona realizes he's just as much of a fool as they are. Despite everything, despite all his attempts to protect himself, he still hopes. And he hated himself for it. Here's where the light novel gives us something that the game never fully explored. Leona's intense self-loathing when Ruggie and the others reach out to him, trying to pull him back. Leona actually looked afraid. The light novel describes hands clinging to him, reaching for him, hands that are sunburned from training, skin and bones from poverty, all of them pleading for his help. What frightens Leona isn't the pressure of their expectations. It's the people themselves. The one who never stops struggling no matter how many times they get knocked down. The eyes filled with hope. The voices that call him housewarden, that believe in him. Because how can he let them down? How can he fail people who believe in him this much? But more than that, what if he tries his absolute hardest and still fails? What does that prove about him? The light novels gives us Leona's internal monologue, and it's devastating. I'm not strong, I'm not wise, and I'm not loved. Is that who I am? I can't accept that. That's the one thing I do not want to admit. I'm utterly fed up with how unreasonable I am. Don't make me think there might be a chance. Just let me believe that there is no point in having expectations. I am tired of struggling and suffering for things I cannot attain. I hate knowing how insignificant and boring I am. These aren't the thoughts of someone who's just lazy or arrogant. These are the thoughts of someone who's been beaten down so many times that he internalized the idea that is fundamentally not enough. Despite how confidently Leona carries himself on the outside, inside, he's constantly telling himself that he's not strong, not wise, not loved, that he's insignificant, boring, pathetic. And the worst part, he knows he's being unreasonable. He knows logically that he doesn't have to be the absolute best to be worthy of love and respect. But knowing that intellectually doesn't make the feelings go away. Here is what Leona is really grappling with. What the light novel calls the most painful thing of all. People say I should try. What else can I do? I've already given it everything I have. Think about how crushing that is. Everyone around him, Valena, his advisors, even Lilia, they all tell him he should try harder, that he has so much potential, that he will do great things if he just applied himself. But what if he had tried? What if he's given everything he has and it still wasn't enough? What if the problem isn't that he's lazy, but that no matter how hard he works, he always be second to Valena, always be compared and found lacking, always be dismissed as despair? Maybe what I should be striving for is the strength to give up, Leona thinks. And that sounds like the most painful thing of all. Because giving up means accepting that he'll never be more than he is. But trying and failing means confirming his worst fear, that he really isn't good enough. So which is worse? Living with unfulfilled potential? Or discovering that you've reached your limit and it's still not enough? Ah, life is truly unfair. All of this, the lifetime of dismissal, the fear that is not enough, the terror of hoping again and self-loathing, the exhaustion of constantly fighting against a fate that seemed determined to keep him down. It all explodes at once. Nona's overblot isn't a tantrum about not being king. It's the breakdown of someone who desperately wanted to be valued, but is too afraid to try for it anymore. In case he proves to himself that he's fundamentally unlovable and inadequate, that the culmination of years of learned helplessness, of protecting himself from hope, because hope leads to disappointment, of running from his potential, because facing it means facing the possibility that even his best isn't good enough. The child was never praised, only feared. The prince was never valued, only compared. The student found belonging only to risk losing it when faced with an insurmountable obstacle. All of it transformed into that monstrous form, lashing out at a world that's beaten him down at every turn. Here's something interesting. After his overblot, Leona seems to be in disbelief that he overblotted at all. Unlike Riddle, who shows immense remorse, or Azul, who has a vulnerable moment with us, Leona doesn't really have that kind of emotional catharsis with his dorm members. We don't see many explicit mentions of Leona making effort to be a better leader or student immediately after. It implies that he agrees to lead the Savannah Cloud team in a tournament, but they still lose, and we don't witness most of it. Some fans interpret this as Leona not learning anything or not changing, but I think it's more complicated than that. Leona has spent his entire life building walls around his emotions, convincing himself not to care. He's not going to suddenly become open and vulnerable just because he overblot. Change, for someone like Leona, is going to be slow and subtle. One of Leona's most misunderstood traits is actually one of his greatest strengths, knowing when to cut his losses. In Book 2, when his plan fails, Leona gives up quickly. Many interpret this as cowardice or fear of failure. But later, in Book 6, we see this same trait in a different light. During Styx's invasion, Leona initially resists capture, but as soon as he realizes he's dealing with Styx agents specifically, he surrenders and allows them to take him in. This isn't cowardice, it's strategic thinking. What would be better? Fighting a losing battle and suffering significant injuries and humiliation, or recognizing that your opponent can overpower you, playing the role of the perfect hostage, and biding your time to strike back when you actually have a chance. This is one of Leona's strengths that look like a weakness to people who doesn't understand him. Knowing when he's the strongest in the room, knowing when he isn't, and acting accordingly rather than defaulting to lashing out with brute strength in every situation. And what makes his capture in Book 6 particularly striking is what he does before being taken. He gives Ruggie instructions. He places Ruggie in charge in his absence to avoid chaos from breaking out in Savannah Cloud. Nona is taking responsibility for his people and looking after them even when he's not physically present. He's willingly relinquishing his power to another rather than selfishly clinging into it. That is leadership, real leadership. Not the kind that requires you to always be the strongest or never admit when you're outmatched. Now, we need to talk about Leona and Jamil's partnership in Book 6 because this is where we really see Leona's growth. It's a fascinating role reversal for Leona. His entire life he's been the one scorned and disregarded in favor of Valena. But now, he's the older one in a position of authority. Jamil is his underclassman, a commoner, and not just any commoner, a servant to another family. Jamil automatically defers to Leona because of his royal status, offering his services to support him. In Jamil's eyes, Leona is just another haughty noble who's lazy and incapable of taking care of himself. But Leona sees right through Jamil. Remember, Leona is incredibly perceptive. He's one of the few people who can see past Jamil's facade. In Jamil's school uniform vignette, Leona straight up tells Jamil it looks like he will kill Kalim in the night. He pick up on those dangerous vibes immediately. So, when they pair up in Book 6, we get this interesting dynamic where Jamil keeps trying to serve Leona, protect him, do everything for him, and Leona keeps refusing. Jamil even hands over his hair ornament without hesitation when Leona demands it, only to watch Leona toss it into Tartarus. Those hair ornaments are precious to Jamil. They're one of the few things he can call his own, symbols of his growth as a mate and what little freedom he has. Gone, just like that. And Jamil has to smile and act honored while internally seething, because this is what always been expected of him. His frustration mounts. He grumbles about how others can't be trusted to act on their own, how he had to make up for everyone's weaknesses, how no one will understand him. And finally, Leona has had enough. Leona tells Jamil a harsh truth. Jamil thinks far too highly of himself while simultaneously making excuses to avoid actually acting. Unlike Jamil, Leona says he understands what his own strengths are. Meanwhile, Jamil is still sitting there, complaining about what he doesn't have, instead of using what he does have. Then, Leona breaks down everyone's strengths. Kalim has charisma, an abundance of money that can move the world to his will. Riddle and Azul have their own respective talents they capitalize on, able to gain both respect and admiration of their peers. Ruggie knows he lacks magical power, so he teams up with someone strong like him. Even Jack knows when to ask upperclassmen for guidance. What do all these people have in common? They work with what they got. They don't waste time complaining about what they are missing. They use their strengths. And notice, that's the opposite of what Jamil doing. But it's also the opposite of what Leona himself has been doing. Both of them has lamented their secondary positions, projected their problems onto others, Valena and Kalim respectively, and schemed to dethrone the people above them, when that wouldn't actually solve the larger systemic issues they face. Here's what makes this scene so powerful. Leona isn't just lecturing Jamil. He's speaking from his own experience. Leona is the one who truly understands what Jamil is going through. He gets the hierarchical structure they were born into and how difficult it is to rise through them. He knows what Jamil is feeling because he experienced the very same. Valena is Leona's calling, the spot of sunshine he could never compare to. Leona is the Jamil in that dynamic, the shunned shadow. But then, Leona points out something crucial. The world has always been unfair, and I haven't gotten the recognition I deserve. But still, you and I are different. Leona sees something in Jamil that he doesn't see in himself. Hope, potential for change. Jamil has the social mobility as a commoner. He has people who are willing to support him and work hard alongside him. Like Kalim, whether Jamil wants to acknowledge that or not. But Leona? There is no changing his status as second-born prince. People will always look down on him no matter what he does, no matter how talented he is. Leona has no hope for himself. He doesn't believe he'll ever be worthy of truly leading as a king, as much as he acts outwardly arrogant and in charge. He has given up on himself, and is painfully aware of it. That's why he's warning Jamil. Don't become like me. Don't let your circumstances become an excuse to stop trying. Don't reach the point where you've given up on yourself entirely. At first, Jamil is upset. He's not used to being called out so directly, or even being hurt at all. He offers to leave Leona alone, and Leona rightfully points out that Jamil is just swinging from one excuse to another. You chose to stop holding back, Leona tells him, so why not actually do it, instead of clinging to the past and using it as an answer to everything. And finally, Jamil realizes that Leona is speaking from his own experience. That's how Leona can so precisely articulate what Jamil has been thinking this entire time. When Jamil thought he was alone, that no one would ever understand him, hear Leona telling him to pick himself up and prove his worth to the world, no matter how much the world beats him down. Whatever Leona thinks of himself, his words scare something in Jamil. Later, when they face Idia and Orto, Jamil stepped in to help power the Thunderbolt lance along with Leona. Previously, Leona had been wielding it alone, but now Jamil adds his strength. I'm not going to remain anyone's servant, Jamil declares. He's throwing aside his self-doubt and pride to assist another person, not because he's obligated to, but because it's a decision he made for himself. This is the freedom he wanted, fully recognized. And for Leona, he get to see firsthand how his words can motivate others to action. Jamil is willingly supporting him now, not trying to do everything for him or order him around. Leona finally asserts himself, not with power or trickery, but with words that inspire others to follow where he leads. In a way, Leona and Jamil are the reverse of Riddle and Azul. They appear nothing alike on the surface, but in truth, they're extremely similar. Two people struggling with feeling inferior to their respective sons, two people who scheme to tear down the person above them, two people who've been making excuses and blaming their circumstances instead of working within them. These two, who has both been struggling to come to terms with who they are and where they want to go, make a huge step in the right direction together. After they defeat an enemy together, they have a surprisingly tender moment. Jamil thanks Leona for what he needed to hear, acknowledging that he was arrogant in only seeing others' negative points. There's even a moment where Leona tries to boss Jamil around, and Jamil refuses, saying that he will no longer be a servant. And instead, they chose to team up instead, as equals, rather than superior and subordinate. They finally see each other for what they truly are, and can understand one another. I want to briefly address something that got mischaracterized a lot. Leona's relationship with Ruggie. Yes, Leona injured Ruggie during his overblot. That is not excusable, but context matters. Leona was in a state of complete mental breakdown, not in control of his actions due to the overblot corruption. And Ruggie, who was probably didn't realize how close Leona was to snapping, kept pushing him when Leona was already at his limit. Does that make what happened okay? No. But Ruggie also wasn't innocent. He was a willing participant in the scheme to take down Malleus. What's important is what happened after. Ruggie was checked by medical professionals and cleared. He was well enough to play in spell-dry matches. He continued to joke at Leona's expense, especially talking about Cheka. And most tellingly, Ruggie still chooses to stay by Leona's side. He still works for him, still teases him without fear, still follows his lead. If Leona was truly a danger to Ruggie, he'd leave. Ruggie's entire goal is survival, and he's smart enough to get into NRC on his own merits. He wouldn't put his life in jeopardy if he genuinely believed that Leona would hurt him again. Their relationship is symbiotic. Leona provides for Ruggie money, food, opportunities. Ruggie provides labor and loyalty. They both benefit from the arrangement, and more than that, there's genuine respect and understanding between them. Ruggie sees Leona's potential. He believes in Leona even when Leona doesn't believe in himself. And that matters more than people realize. So, what had actually changed for Leona post-overblot? It's subtle. It's not a dramatic personality shift or a tearful promise to be better. That's not who Leona is. And it will be unrealistic for someone with this level of emotional walls to suddenly become open and vulnerable. But if you pay attention, the changes are there. He's returning home. In book 4, Leona mentions he's going back to Sunset Savannah for winter break. This is huge. This is someone who's been actively avoiding home, who makes excuses not to return, choosing to face his family and his homeland. He's not getting held back again. Leona is actually putting in the effort to graduate on time. He stopped sabotaging his own academic progress. He's committing to an internship. Leona chooses to intern at an energy lab, a field that would immensely benefit the Sunset Savannah, which is rich in natural resources. This is someone who once acted bitter when Valina suggested that he should use his intelligence to help their country. Now, he's actively pursuing something that would do exactly that. He's leading more actively. Other characters mention that Leona is running more frequent spell drive practices, actually showing up to lead his team. In Book 5, we see him instructing people in physical labor for the FDC preparation. He's helping others find their strengths, whether it's giving Jamil that harsh but necessary talk, or advising his club members on how to improve their game. Leona has become someone who helps others capitalize on their potential, even if he still struggles to see his own. These aren't flashy changes. They're quiet, practical steps toward building a future he once thought was impossible for him. Here's something important to understand about Leona's character arc. He's learning what it actually means to be a king. For most of his life, Leona equated being king with being loved and valued automatically. He thought the crown was what made someone worthy of respect and admiration. But what he's discovering, through his dorm members, through his conversation with Jamil, through his own experiences, is that real leadership isn't about a title or a bloodline. It's about recognizing and cultivating the strength of those around you. It's about knowing when to push forward and when to strategically retreat. It's about inspiring others to follow you, not because they have to, but because they want to. Leona has been a king all along, in the ways that actually matter. His dorm members chose him. They believe in him. They call him king, not because of his royal blood, but because of who he is and what he's capable of. He just had to learn to believe it himself. The light novel really drives home something that I think is crucial to understand Leona. He's not afraid of failure. He's afraid of hope. Failure is familiar. He knows how to deal with failure. He's been dealing with it his whole life. But hope? Hope is terrifying because hope means being vulnerable. Hope means opening yourself up to disappointment. Hope means trying your hardest and risking the discovery that your best still isn't enough. That's why Leona built all those walls around himself. That's why he acts lazy and dismissive. That's why he pretends to not care. It's armor against hope, against caring, against the possibility of being hurt again. But his dorm members, with their sparkling eyes and their belief in him, they keep chipping away at that armor. They make him want to try again. They make him hope again. And that's what broke him during his overblot. The realization that despite everything, despite all his efforts to protect himself, he still hoped, he still cared, he was still vulnerable. At the core of Leona's character is a question that I think resonates with a lot of people. Am I enough? Not am I the best or am I better than my sibling? Just am I enough as I am? Leona has spent his whole life being told implicitly and explicitly that he's not. He's not Felina. He's not the firstborn. He's not going to be king. He's the spare, the second best, the one who will never quite measure up. And when you hear that message enough times, especially from childhood, you start to believe it, even when you're objectively talented, intelligent, and capable. There's this voice in your head that says, but it's not enough. That is the voice that Leona has been listening to his whole life. The one that tells him to stop trying because he'll just fail anyway. The one that says his efforts are pointless because the game is rigged against him. But here's what Leona is slowly learning. Worth isn't determined by comparison to others. It's not about being the best or the first or the most loved. You can be enough just by being yourself and using what you have to its fullest potential. It's a lesson he tried to teach Jamil. Now, he had to learn to apply it to himself. There's a reason Leona's story resonates so deeply with a lot of fans. And I think it's because he embodies something many people experience. Gifted kid burnout. You know, the type, the kid who always been told they were so smart, so talented, so capable, the one who excelled without trying in their early years, the one everyone said had so much potential. But then life gets harder. the competition gets steeper. And suddenly, being naturally gifted isn't enough anymore. You have to actually work for it. And when you do work for it, when you try your hardest and still come up short, when you're still in second place, still not quite good enough, still being compared to someone else, it breaks something in you. You start to think, if I try this hard and still fail, what does that say about me? Maybe I'm not actually that talented. Maybe everyone was wrong about my potential. So you stop trying. Because if you don't try, you can maintain that illusion that you could have succeeded if you wanted to. You protect yourself from the devastating realization that even your best might not be enough. That is Leona. That's his entire defensive strategy. And it's painfully relatable to anyone who's ever been afraid to try. Because the possibility of failure was too crushing to face. What I love about Leona's character arc is that it's messy and imperfect and ongoing. He didn't have a dramatic epiphany during his overblot and suddenly became a reformed person. He didn't cry and apologize and promise to be better. He's still lazy sometimes. He still schemes. He still has that sharp edge to his personality. He still carries all that baggage from his childhood. But he's also trying in small ways, in quiet ways. He's making progress. He's facing his past instead of running from it. He's investing his future instead of giving up on it. He's learning to lead not through power or intimidation, but through understanding and inspiration. Change isn't linear. Healing from trauma doesn't happen overnight, and Leona's story reflects that reality. He's not fixed, he's not cured, but he's moving forward, one small step at a time, with people who refuse to give up on him even when he's ready to give up on himself. I think Leona's character resonates with a lot of people because his struggles are universal, even if the specific circumstances aren't. A lot of us has feel like we're fighting against circumstances we can control. A lot of us have been afraid to try because we are terrified of confirming our worst fears about ourselves. A lot of us have been told we are not living up to our potential, while simultaneously being made to feel like we are never be good enough. The feeling of being trapped between hope and despair, the exhaustion of constantly being compared to someone else, the fear that if you really give it your all and still fail, you'll have to accept that you're just not enough. That's painfully human. That's real. And what Leona's story shows us is that you don't have to be the best to be worthy. You don't have to win every battle to be a good leader. You don't have to be perfect to deserve love and respect. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is keep trying even when you're scared, even when you failed before, even when you don't fully believe it yourself yet. Because there are people who believe in you. There's a path that called you king, not because of what you were born as, but because of who you chose to be. What Leona needed was exactly what he found at NRC, a place where he belonged, people who valued him for who he is, and the courage to keep trying even when failure seems inevitable. He's still lazy. He still naps constantly and avoid works when he can. But that laziness is less of a shield now and more just who he is. And that's okay. Because his worth isn't measured by how hard he works or how much he achieves compared to his brother. His worth is inherent, and he finally, slowly, starting to believe that. So, why did Leona overblot? He overblotted because he spent his entire life being told he wasn't enough, and he believed it. He overblotted because he found a place where he finally belonged and was terrified of losing it. He overblotted because people had hope in him, and that hope forced him to confront his deepest fear that even his best wouldn't be good enough. But most fundamentally, Leona overblotted because he was exhausted. Exhausted from running from himself, from his potential, from the possibility that he might actually be worthy of love and respect if he just allowed himself to be vulnerable enough to try. His story isn't about a prince who wanted a throne. It's about a person who wanted to matter, who wanted to be valued, who wanted to believe in himself, but was too afraid of disappointment to take that risk. It's about the painful question we all have to face at some point. Is it easier to give up and accept your place, or to hope and risk failing miserably? For most of his life, Yona chose the former. It felt safer. But now, he's learning that maybe, just maybe, it's worth the risk to try. Not because of success is guaranteed. It's not. But because the people around him make him want to be better. Because his pack deserve a king who won't give up on them. Because deep down, underneath all that cynicism and learned helplessness, there's still a part of him that hopes. And as long as that hope exists, as painful and terrifying as it might be, there's a path forward. From darkness, he's rising anew, like the sun upon the savannah. What do you think? Does this deeper look at Leona's character change how you see him? Have you noticed other aspects of his story that shows his struggle with self-worth and fear of hope? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and remember, trying and failing doesn't make you worthless. Give up on yourself before you even try. That's the only real failure. And even then, it's never too late to start again. Take care, everyone. Like and subscribe for more Twisted Wonderland character analysis.